Hi everyone, and welcome to another live stream. And today is a very special live stream because it's the first time I'm going to be moderating a debate, and this is under the sub banner of Reason Belief, that is Reason Debates. So I've got two gentlemen with me. I've got True Patristic Path, and also I have Jason here with me as well. True Patristic Path is Eastern Orthodox, and Jason is Roman Catholic. The debate format will be 20 minutes opening statements, and Jason has been decided will start off the presentations. Then we'll go into a 10-minute rebuttal, and then there'll be 20 minutes cross-examination each time, and then there will be a 5-minute closing argument, and then there'll be time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have a question you want to pose to a particular member of the debate team here today, then please do stick it in the chat. Super chats will be prioritized. However, if you can't afford a super chat, don't worry, just phrase it with question and then who you're addressing it to, and I'll make sure to pin it so that I can refer back to it later. So without further ado, let's introduce our panel today. So let's start off as you're going first, Jason. Who are you? Where can people find you? And just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Greetings, my name is Jason. I used to be an Eastern Orthodox, and I converted to Catholicism by the grace of God 8 months ago. And where you can find me is on my TikTok at Byzantine Papist, and you can find me on YouTube. My YouTube is Byzantine or Papist from Byzantium, and that's where you can find me. So yeah, God bless.
God bless. Thank you so much. And True Patristic Path, can you introduce yourself, please? Where are you from? And a little bit more about yourself.
What's up, guys? I'm from the beautiful state of Massachusetts in the U.S. I'm an Orthodox convert from Protestantism, like many of you here in the chat, I imagine. I am a Byzantine chanter for my local church, and I am going to try my best to defend the Orthodox conciliar view in Chalcedon. I appreciate the time and being here with you two gentlemen.
Great stuff. So the topic of today's live stream is, does Chalcedon demonstrate papal jurisdiction over the entire church as per Vatican I? So without further ado, let me get your slides up, Jason. There we go. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my timer. The timer will stay on screen so that everyone can see how much time has elapsed. And your 20-minute opening statement starts now.
Greetings, everyone. Today, I will be proving that the Pope had universal jurisdiction during the time of the Council of Chalcedon. Now, before we get into the evidence, I'm going to clear up one misconception that is usually in the argumentation of the Eastern Orthodox. When Pastor Returner states, "Wherefore we teach and declare, by divine ordinance, the Roman Church possesses a preeminence of ordinary power over every other church, and that this jurisdictional power of the Roman Pontiff is both episcopal and immediate," we do not mean that the Pope can just act as he wishes at any point in time, but rather he is to keep a close eye on all the churches and act immediately when he sees there's a disturbance in a particular church, just as the German bishops in their papally approved letter clarified when they state the Pope has the obligation to be vigilant, to see to it that every bishop fulfills his duties in all areas of his responsibility. And when a bishop cannot fulfill his duties, or some other necessity requires it, then the Pope has the right and the duty, not as the bishop of the diocese, but as the Pope, to set in order everything that pertains to the administration of the diocese. So what I have to prove today is that the Pope during that time had the authority to intervene in such matters. Now, as we head to the past, we must ask ourselves, did Pope St. Leo have the mindset of Vatican I? To answer this question, we must look into the letters and sermons of Leo, where we should first go to see Vatican I papal claims clearly manifest and taught is to his letter to the Sicilian bishops, where he says, by God's precepts and the apostles' admonitions, we, Rome, are incited to keep a careful watch over the state of all the churches, and if anywhere aught is found that needs rebuke, to recall them with speedy care, either from the stupidity of ignorance or from forwardness and presumption. Here, we clearly see that Pope St. Leo is teaching that he was divinely appointed to keep a careful watch over the universal church, and that if he sees if anyone is out of line, then he will be sure to put them in check. This harkens back to the clarification of the German bishops on the Pope's jurisdiction when they said the Pope has the right and the duty to set in order everything that pertains to the administration of the diocese. The second call which will settle the debate on Leo's mindset is his fourth sermon, when he says, when he says, and still out of the whole world, only Peter is chosen. He is put before the calling of all nations and at the head of all the apostles and all the fathers of the church. Although in the people of God there are many bishops and pastors, Peter in his own right governs all whom Christ rules as the head. Leo couldn't have been more clear about the depth to where his authority extends to, and this is to the entire body whom Christ reigns over. Now, my opponent cannot just dismiss these letters and sermons as the Pope exaggerating his authority, since he is bound to them by the virtue of the Sixth Ecumenical Council, accepting the synodal letter of Sophronius of Jerusalem, in which it states, I also attach myself to all his letters and teachings as if they issue from the mouth of the chief Peter, and I kiss and cleave to them and embrace them with all my soul. Another and earlier instance of the East being bound to the letters of Pope St. Leo came at the close of the Dedication Schism with the signing of the Formula of Hornisdas that was received by all the Eastern Patriarchs, which includes a condition for communion with the Apostolic See, which states, following, as we have said before, the Apostolic See in all things and proclaiming all its decisions, we endorse and approve all the letters which Pope St. Leo wrote concerning the Christian religion, with the proposition of both Eastern and Western churches being bound to the sermon of the letters of St. Leo the Great being substantiated. We could just end the debate, given that the essence of Vatican I is undoubtedly embedded in the writings of Pope St. Leo. But since this is about the council as a whole, we're going to have to go even further and showcase that the papal claims of Leo was indeed the reality of the church's structure. It was what was believed and practiced. And for us to see this, we now shall proceed to the council itself. For this, I'm going to focus on four main situations that occurred at the council of Chalcedon, that being the appeal of Theodoret, the acceptance of Theodoret's appeal,
I have just paused the timer. Is everything okay, Jason? Jason, can you hear me? True Patristic Path, can you hear me? Or is it just...
I'm here, brother.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I don't know what happened. Sorry.
Yep.
Right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. Right. Don't worry, Jason. I paused your timer, and just let me know when you're ready to resume, and I'll resume the timer for you.
Yeah, I'm ready to resume. But yeah, the first case we'll delve into is the case for Theodoret Osiris. Theodoret Osiris had been deposed by the Second Synod of Ephesus for heresy. Yet from the imperial edict addressed to Dioscorus of Alexandria, we learned that he wasn't even allowed to attend the synod at all. And despite not being permitted to appear or defend himself, the council still went ahead and judged him and formally deposed him without him having a proper trial. That's clearly uncanonical, because the canon of the church explicitly required that the accused must either be present or at least properly summoned when their case is about to be heard. Now, after the news had reached him about his deposition, Theodoret appealed directly to St. Leo and pleaded with him, saying, Above all, I implore you to tell me whether I ought to put up with the unrighteous deposition or not, for I await your decision. If you bid me abide by the sentence of condemnation, I abide, and henceforth I will trouble no man and will wait for the righteous tribunal of our God and Savior. From this, we get the indication that decisions made within a council needs to be ratified by Rome for it to be wholly valid, which would explain why Theodoret says in his appeal that I await your decision. If you bid me abide by the sentence of condemnation, I abide. Another indication we get from this appeal is that Theodoret isn't basing his plea to Rome on the canons, but rather basing it on privileges inherent to Peter. When he contrasts his appeal with St. Paul, appeal to St. Peter in Acts, when he says, if Paul, the herald of truth, the trumpet of the Holy Ghost, hastened the great Peter in order that he might carry from him the desired solution of difficulties to those at Antioch who were in doubt about living in conformity with the law, much more do we, then insignificant and small, hasten to your apostolic see in order to receive from you a cure from the wounds of the churches. Now, since the Eastern Orthodox don't believe that the Bishop of Rome is the arbiter of the validity of decisions within a council, then they will try to go a different route. So then to try to reconcile this situation with their ecclesiology, they will then try to interpret this as Theodoret simply appealing to the Chalcedon canons, as if he's asking for some kind of reversement of the condemnation within a limited canonical framework. But the issue is that the traditional Eastern Orthodox interpretation of this canon isn't to say that these canons granted Rome a universal worldwide apostolic jurisdiction. Rather, it's to say that the apostolic jurisdiction was strictly limited to churches subject to Rome. Take Nicodemus, for example, in his interpretation of the fourth canon. He says, this canon too is consistent with the one above, in that it says that if any bishop be deposed by bishops of nearby provinces, or of nearby and neighboring provinces, but claims that he can justify himself before another tribunal, let another bishop not be appointed by ordination to the throne of the one deposed until the Pope, after being informed about the case, has had the chance to decide whether the verdict ought to stand or be set aside. Note, however, that the present canon 2 is one relating to provinces subject to the Pope and has nothing to do with provinces not subject to him. And it's not just individual canonists making this claim. The patriarchal encyclical of 1895, which was issued as a response to Pope Leo XIII and accepted across all the Orthodox patriarchate states, each particular self-governing church, both in the East and West, was totally independent and self-administered. In the time of the 7 ecumenical councils, the Bishop of Rome had no right to interfere, but on important questions which needed the sanction of the universal church, an appeal was made to an ecumenical council, which alone was and is the supreme tribunal of the universal church. So when we take everything from the Eastern Orthodox paradigm, the actions of Pope St. Leo don't really fit into the Eastern Orthodox framework at all. On one hand, their canon lawyers are saying Chalcedon only applies to regions subject to Rome, which would imply that if Theodoret is appealing to Rome from the East, he is effectively recognizing a kind of authority that supersedes that of the Chalcedon canons. And on the other hand, the encyclical is saying that the Pope is subject to synods, yet here we have a bishop directly appealing to him to overturn the judgment of a synod that had already deposed him. So the Eastern Orthodox are then pushed into the corner and has to either say that the Pope was acting in an uncanonical manner, assuming the authority was unilaterally overturning the decisions of the synod, or that the papacy is in fact true, and that the Bishop of Rome was rightly exercising universal authority that belonged to him. However, the Orthodox can then say that this isn't a false dichotomy, and say that there's a third option, and that would be to say that the reinstatement by Pope St. Leo wasn't even accepted anyway, and that it was Chalcedon that reinstated Theodoret and the people deposed at the Synod of Ephesus too, which then moves on to our next point, the acceptance of Theodoret's reinstatement by the council. Now, when it comes to the papal claims, the Orthodox don't actually argue that these claims were never made at all. Even in their own patriarchal encyclical of 1895, they say sometimes certain Anglicians, ambitious bishops of Rome raised excessive claim to an absolutism unknown to the church. Such were duly reproved and rebuked. So my burden of proof isn't to go around showing that these papal claims existed, because even they acknowledge that. The real question is whether these claims were actually accepted and acted upon in the life of the church. Now, when it comes to the reinstatement of Theodoric Osiris, the Orthodox will usually say that he was reinstated at the Council of Chalcedon itself and not beforehand. But does the evidence actually point to that? Not really. In fact, when you look at the acts of the council, you see Theodoric already participating as the Bishop Osiris, taking part in the proceedings and even accepting decrees on behalf of his church, such as when he assents to the definition of the council in session 5. That already suggests he wasn't being treated as someone still under condemnation. But the clearest proof that comes right at the very first session of Chalcedon, when Theodoric enters, he isn't treated as a condemned bishop awaiting judgment, but is immediately placed in the position of an accuser. The imperial official state, the most devout Bishop Theodoric, restored to his see by the most holy Archbishop of Rome, has now appeared in the role of accuser. Lest the hearing be disrupted, let us conclude what we had initiated. Now, why is that detail so important? Because according to the sixth canon associated with the Synod of Constantinople 382 and integrated into the canons of Constantinople I, it states, furthermore, if any had been previously condemned by the church for certain offences and cast out or excommunicated, whether they be of the clergy or of the laity, they also are not permitted to accuse a bishop until they have first cleared themselves of their own crime. So if Theodoric had truly still been under condemnation from the Second Council of Ephesus, he would not have been allowed to act as an accuser at all. The fact that he is placed in that role from the very beginning shows that he had already been cleared of the charges against him. And as I said, we know that Theodoric appealed to Rome after the deposition, and we know the outcome of that appeal, since we have a letter from the papal legate Hilary the Deacon to the Emperor Saint Pulcheria, that concerning that Ephesus too had been done away with, where he says, "Let your venerable clemency therefore know that the most reverend Pope, together with the whole Western Council, has rejected all those things which were done at Ephesus." This undoubtedly confirms that Theodoric was cleared of his crimes as a direct result of Pope St. Leo rejecting the Second Council of Ephesus. So this lines up perfectly with the statement of the 5th century historian Chalcedon when he gives the reason as to why the Pope rejected the deposition of St. Athanasius by stating that there is a sacerdotal canon which declares that whatever is enacted contrary to the judgment of the Bishop of Rome is automatically known. Now, the next case is the dilemma of Dioscorus of Alexandria. Now, Dioscorus had been admitted into the council of Chalcedon as one of the judges, and then almost immediately was moved to the section of the accused once the papal legates protested. We then learned that a formal complaint had been brought against him, and that complaint came from Eusebius of Dorylaeum, who, just like Theodoric Osiris, had been deposed from his see at the Second Council of Ephesus. Now, just like Theodoric, Eusebius also appealed to Rome and pleaded with Pope St. Leo to overturn the decisions of that Roman Synod. He says, "To your see, I entreat your blessedness, pronounce the reversal and nullity of any unjust condemnation, by the most religious Dioscorus and of their decree, and gives me back the dignity of knight episcopate and communion with yourself." From this, we again see another Eastern witness recognizing that the Pope is not bound by the decisions of Eastern synods, but rather has the authority to override and reverse them if he judges it fitting. Now, back to the key point: the accuser of Dioscorus was Eusebius of Dorylaeum, who we just saw appealing to Pope St. Leo for the reversal of that council. He is now sitting at the Council of Chalcedon as the accuser of Dioscorus, who himself was still regarded as a valid bishop. For Eusebius to be able to act as accuser at Chalcedon, it necessarily means that he had already been reinstated, because the canons do not allow a deposed or excommunicated bishop to take on the role of accuser against another bishop in good standing. So this shows that the decisions of the Second Council of Ephesus had already been recognized as null and void right from the beginning, thus meaning they already accepted the supreme jurisdiction of the Pope. And this is where the real dilemma comes in. If one wants to maintain that Dioscorus was validly judged on the basis of Eusebius' accusation, then they also have to say that Eusebius had already been reinstated prior to Chalcedon, which would mean that the Pope had already annulled the decisions of Ephesus II, thus proving his universal jurisdiction. But if they don't want to accept that, then the alternative is to say that Chalcedon allowed a deposed and unrestored bishop to act as an accuser, which would make the whole process uncanonical. And at that point, they'd basically have to concede to the Oriental position that Chalcedon's deposition of Dioscorus was itself invalid, and that the bishops consecrated in the place of Dioscorus were also invalid and uncanonical. The final case I'd like to bring up is the case of Maximus of Antioch. Maximus had already been appointed as Bishop of Antioch by Dioscorus of Alexandria at the Second Council of Ephesus, and by all means this appointment was uncanonical. It was done by one man alone, whereas Canon 4 of the First Council of Nicaea clearly states that a bishop, especially at that level, is to be appointed by the bishops of the province with the proper synodal structure in place. Now, since the council was rejected by Pope St. Leo, it would logically follow that Maximus himself would also be deposed, because the very council that established him as a bishop was being done away with. But when we get to the council of Chalcedon, we see Maximus is actually present and participating as a regular bishop, even though the council that appointed him had been annulled. So the question is, why is that? We get the answer in the eighth section of Chalcedon, where the papal legates state a council where those lawless crimes were read out cannot be approved. And for this reason, it is clearly pointless to read out the proceedings there, if all the proceedings there have been made null by the most blessed and apostolic bishop of the city of Rome. It is manifest that the most holy archbishop of the church of Antioch is exempt from them, since the blessed bishop subsequently received him into his own communion. So what does this show? It shows that even though the council of Ephesus II was annulled by the authority of St. Leo, Maximus was exempted from that annulment because he had been received into communion by Pope St. Leo the Great. The Pope had the authority not only to reject an entire council, but also to dictate what remains valid within the rejected council. With papal jurisdiction being sufficiently substantiated, I conclude my opening statement.
Great stuff. And I'm going to stop the timer there. And you are just under 20 minutes. Good job, Jason. Well done. So without further ado, we're going to reset the timer. I'm going to set it for 20 minutes. Get your slides up. True.
Yeah, there you go. They should be there.
Yeah, they're all there.
Mine aren't as pretty as Jason's, but I think you guys will learn about the Council of Chalcedon. So whenever you're ready, brother.
Well, that's the aim. Just to reiterate to everyone in the chat, please play nice. Attack the arguments, don't attack the debaters. Make sure that we're playing nice, being good Christian people and all that jazz. I will time people out if you are spamming in the chat or if you are being unnecessarily nasty. So please make sure you are bringing educated points as opposed to benign brain farts. So without further ado, let me switch over to the timer. And whenever you're ready, your time starts now.
If anyone says that the Roman pontiff has merely an office of supervision and guidance, and not the full and supreme power of jurisdiction over the whole church, and that this not only in matters of faith and morals, but also in those which concern discipline and government of the church dispersed throughout the entire world, or that he has only the principal part, but not the absolute fullness of this supreme power, or that this power of his is not ordinary and immediate, both over all in each of the churches and over all in each of the pastors and faithful, let him be anathema. What we read is Vatican I. This claim is an ultramontanist claim. This isn't this papal minimalism that Jason is posturing immediately. Notice immediately had to posture to escape the words of the dogma that he accepts himself. Nonetheless, the First Vatican Council here is declaring the strongestly explicit stated form of papal claims, including universal, ordinary, and immediate jurisdiction over the entire church. Ordinary, meaning that the Pope possesses his universal jurisdiction inherently by virtue of the papal office itself and not by some decision of the Church. Immediate, meaning that he can act and decree dogma authoritatively and unilaterally if necessary. And universal, simply meaning he possesses this authority over all Christians. Yes, even bishops and other patriarchs, including those not in Rome's immediate jurisdiction. So, like I said, my friend Jason here has a very high burden. Do not be deceived. He has to show that the Pope had, quote, full and supreme power of jurisdiction over the whole Church, close quote, according to Vatican I, which is literally what we just read. Furthermore, he has to show that the Pope also utilized this power, or in other words, demonstrate for us that the papacy had jurisdiction over the entire Church as per Vatican I, this, of course, being the debate prompt. The Council of Chalcedon, however, demonstrates an Orthodox conciliar ecclesiology and not this ultramontanist view of Vatican I. For some context, the Council of Chalcedon, very briefly, was basically addressing Christological controversy, but mainly actually a bunch of ecclesiastical controversies from prior councils and all sorts of mess between these different Christological groups. My three criterion for demonstrating to you that Orthodox conciliarity is present during the Council of Chalcedon are very simple. One, the Tome of St. Leo. Secondly, the council and the bishop's standard being Nicaea, Constantinople I, and St. Cyril, not Rome. And of course, the lovely, lovely Canon 28. First, the Tome of St. Leo is constantly appealed to by Roman Catholics as supposedly decisive proof that the Council of Chalcedon recognized papal supremacy in the Vatican I sense. However, the actual historical record demonstrates something fundamentally different. The tome was not accepted because it came from Rome in and of itself, nor because Leo possessed an inherent unilateral jurisdiction over the entire Church, but rather that the tome was examined, scrutinized, and held to a higher authority, namely, as I just said, the prior councils and Church Fathers. It was accepted afterwards because it was found to be orthodox. As Jason's lovely scholars say in the introduction to the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, quote, the bishops of Chalcedon interpreted Leo's tome according to the teaching of Cyril. And again, quote, the great majority of the council fathers who signed the text assured themselves, as is clear from the Codex Encyclicus, that it did no more than expound the obvious meaning of Nicaea in terms indebted to Cyril of Alexandria. Let me read that again. It did no more than expound the obvious meaning of the Nicene Creed in terms indebted to St. Cyril of Alexandria. If Vatican I papacy was true, as we just read, this would be impossible. Their examination of the tome was conciliar and orthodox, and the councils, plural, but especially Chalcedon in this case, held the ultimate authority. During Chalcedon, the bishops did not simply say, well, guys, that's it. The Pope has made a dogmatic declaration upon the whole Church. Wrap it up. Nope. Instead, they compared Leo's tome against the theological inheritance already received by the Church, which you will find in the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, as recorded by our beautiful Catholic scholar, Richard Price. As admitted, as I said, by the same Catholic scholars who hold to this broken system. The Acts of Chalcedon explicitly demonstrates this. The tome, first of all, was read publicly before the bishops. Objections were raised by bishops from Illyricum and Palestine, excuse my awful pronunciation, and a commission was formed in order to compare St. Leo's teaching with the faith of Nicaea, Constantinople, and, of course, St. Cyril of Alexandria. Again, demonstrating Orthodox conciliarity over Vatican I's understanding of papal authority. If Leo possessed immediate and ordinary jurisdiction over the entire Church, then his dogmatic decree, namely the tome, should have been binding simply by the virtue of his office. In fact, Richard Price mentions that he thought that's what it was going to be, but the East thought otherwise. You can find this in his introduction to the Acts. And again, when you read the actual Acts, we read the exact opposite. The council acted as a judge, and the bishops with conciliarity together function as the final authority. For an example, in volume 2, page 26 of the Acts, you'll find, quote, Atticus, the most devout bishop of Nicopolis, said, since your magnificence is showing readiness to listen with patience, order it to be granted to us that within a few days what is pleasing to God and to the Holy Fathers may be formulated with calm reflection and unruffled thought. Since the letter of our Master and Holy Father and Archbishop Leo, who administers the Apostolic See, has now been read, we should also be provided with the letter of Blessed Cyril, written to Nestorius, in which he urged him to ascend to the 12 chapters, so that at the time of the examination, we may be found well prepared. Okay, so they're literally saying they're going to examine St. Leo's tome, and they're asking for a break. As you can see, St. Cyril was the standard again, not the Pope. A few sentences later, the bishops say, no, you can't judge the first see. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Actually, they say, quote, the hearing will be adjourned for 5 days, close quote. Again, they're explicitly saying they're going to deliberate and judge the tome of St. Leo. This is Orthodox conciliarity. The golden child of papal quote minds, quote, Peter has spoken through Leo, close quote, in its fullness again shows St. Cyril and the councils to be the standard. The bishops were not acclaiming the strange Vatican I style charism of Peter. Rather, they were praising the orthodoxy of Leo's Christology using flowery language, which I will demonstrate later, recognizing that the apostles taught accordingly and recognizing that the tome agreed with St. Cyril. Hear for yourself. This is directly from volume 2, page 25. Quote, after the reading of the aforesaid letter, I gotta make sure I'm on the right. After the reading of the aforesaid letter, the most devout bishops exclaimed, quote, this is the faith of the fathers. This is the faith of the apostles. We all believe accordingly. We Orthodox believe accordingly. Anathema to him who does not believe accordingly. Peter has uttered this through Leo. The apostles taught accordingly. Leo taught piously and truly. Cyril taught accordingly. Eternal is the memory of St. Cyril. Leo and Cyril taught the same. Leo and Cyril taught accordingly. Anathema to him who does not believe accordingly. This is the true faith, and we Orthodox think accordingly. This is the faith of the fathers. This, quote, is Orthodox conciliarity. Quote, we Orthodox think accordingly. Quote, this is the faith of our fathers, close quote. Explicitly, they're saying as a whole, using the criterion of the apostolic teaching passed by the apostles and St. Cyril, that St. Leo is teaching rightly. Not that because he's an infallible pope, he made this decree upon the whole church. Furthermore, if the bishops truly believed Leo's authority was supreme and irreformable in and of itself, then it becomes difficult to explain why portions of the tome initially caused concern amongst Eastern bishops. As I mentioned in the past, several bishops feared that Leo's language leaned too close to Nestorianism, which I believe you can find in the fifth session. Particularly regarding the distinction of the two natures in Christ. Famously, in the middle of reading the tome of Leo, the Illyrian bishop and the Palestinian bishop, as I mentioned earlier, interrupted multiple times due to the language of the tome of St. Leo being kind of close to Nestorianism, which even Richard Price says that at times St. Leo's exposition of the faith isn't as beautiful as it should have been. The Pope, who possesses infallible and immediate jurisdiction, would not require ratification or review from an ecumenical council, much less take such interruptions. Throughout the Acts of Chalcedon, the bishops constantly appealed to the faith of the fathers. The Creed of Nicaea served as a universal doctrinal benchmark. In Constantinople I, reaffirmed and expanded this same Nicene faith. St. Cyril's Christology, as we laid out, especially in his letters against Nestorius, functioned as a central standard of orthodoxy. If you read Richard Price text of the translation of the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, you will find this on almost every single page. It's insane. It would be absolutely shameful, however, not to mention yet again my favorite Orthodox apologist, Richard Price. In his intro, he says, quote, the bishops of Chalcedon interpreted Leo's tome according to the teaching of Cyril, close quote. And again, quote, the great majority of the council fathers who signed the text assured themselves that the tome did no more than expound on the obvious meaning of the Nicene Creed in terms indebted to Cyril of Alexandria, close quote. Again, as I said earlier, this is Orthodox conciliarity. These types of appeal to justify St. Leo, or anyone else for that matter, in this council, which you'll find multiple times, they use the standard of the prior councils and the fathers, namely St. Cyril of Alexandria. Another crucial point is the treatment of the former Pope of Alexandria, Dioscorus. Papists frequently portray his condemnation as evidence of papal supremacy because Leo condemned him prior to the council. Yet, if you can read, Dioscorus was not deposed solely by papal decree. He was formally judged and deposed by the council itself. Price says, quote, ignoring 3 summons from the synod, Dioscorus incurred the canonical penalty of deposition, close quote. In ignoring 3 summons from the synod, Dioscorus incurred the canonical penalty of deposition, close quote. Papists try to argue that Dioscorus was single-handedly deposed by Leo because he tried to excommunicate Leo among some other crazy stuff during Ephesus 2. However, Price says, quote, Dioscorus and Ephesus 2 were never explicitly condemned as heretical, but instead rejected on grounds of lawlessness and violence, which, thank God, Jason actually mentioned this in his opening statement in another manner. Pointing towards, of course, St. Flavian's treatment and the general militant level of control over the attendees of Ephesus 2 in 449, which you'll find if you read the Acts as Richard Price has recorded it. The third and most perhaps devastating issue for my best friend here, Jason, is Canon 28 of Chalcedon. What we find is that Catholics will hand wave it and say, well, it was rejected by Leo, which is true. However, the question isn't just about what did Rome believe, but what did the entire Orthodox Catholic Church believe, right? And so what do they believe and what are they held to? Well, Canon 28 directly contradicts the Vatican I understanding of papal supremacy because it explicitly bases Rome's primacy upon the charism of Peter given by Jesus Christ. No. The primacy upon political and administrative considerations rather than divine institution. Quote, for the fathers rightly granted privileges to the throne of old Rome because it was the royal city, close quote. This is New Advent on Canon 28 of Chalcedon. Canon 28 famously states that Constantinople should enjoy equal privileges with old Rome because it is, quote, the new Rome, close quote. The reasoning given by the council is deeply important. The fathers explain that Rome received primacy because it was the imperial city. Also, as Richard Price mentions, because it was the place of many martyrs, including St. Peter and Paul. The fathers explain that Rome received primacy for these reasons. Therefore, Constantinople, now being the seat of the empire and the Senate, should likewise receive elevated status within the church. Again, not some papal charism. If Rome's supremacy was based on this divine decree by Christ to Peter, as according to Vatican I, then all the Eastern Fathers grounding ecclesiastical rank of Rome also in geopolitical reality would make no sense whatsoever. Yet this is exactly what Canon 28 does. Canon 28 passed, was, and is still observed, even despite strong opposition from Leo's legates, as well as later on Pope Leo himself, which is recorded in session 16 for the legates, and you can find Pope Leo's letters, I'm sure, very easily online. The early papists protested, arguing that the canon violated the prerogatives of Rome, and yet the council proceeded anyway. This sounds like Orthodox conciliarity and not weird papal tyranny. How did Canon 28 pass? Well, because Chalcedon did not operate under Vatican I ecclesiology. Let's focus even more so to the fact that the papal apologists respond by pointing out that Leo later rejected Canon 28. This response actually further proves the Orthodox point. Again, let's go back to my favorite Orthodox apologist, Richard Price says, quote, at the council's final session, the 28th canon ratifying Constantinople's ecclesiastical primacy in the East was adopted over their strenuous objections, close quote. Was adopted over their strenuous objections. Guys. The canon continued to gain acceptance in the East, regardless of papal objections, as Richard Price will go on to explain. And historically speaking, almost all reasonable scholars agree that Constantinople undeniably rose to the position envisioned by Chalcedon. If papal authority were true, immediate, and universally binding, as in Vatican I, the canon should have simply disappeared into the ether the moment St. Leo rejected it. Instead, the opposite occurred. The practical reception of Canon 28 demonstrates Orthodox conciliarity. Let us remind ourselves, after having heard all that which I have presented, what the Catholics want to defend. If anyone says that the Roman pontiff has merely an office of supervision and guidance and not the full and supreme power of jurisdiction over the whole church, and this not only in matters of faith and morals, but also in those which concern the discipline and government of the church dispersed throughout the whole world, or that he has only the principal part, but not the absolute fullness of the supreme power, or that this power of his is not ordinary and immediate, both over all in each of the churches and over all in each of the pastors of the faithful, let him be anathema. Well, guys, I just presented to you the Pope rejecting Canon 28, the legates vehemently rejecting Canon 28, and it still passed. I demonstrated that Rome was judged according to the prior councils and to St. Cyril. And I also showed you multiple times that there were many cases in which they appealed mainly to prior councils and St. Cyril, not only in the case of St. Leo and his tome. With that, with my 4 minutes left, I will end my opening statement, as I read a little faster than I probably should have. So,
no worries, and we'll stop the timer there. Thank you so much indeed for that opening argument, and we are back in the room. Do make sure to send in your questions for our debate panel, and we will proceed on with the next stage, which is the rebuttal stage. This is 10 minutes each, so I'm going to adjust the timer for 10 minutes. And Jason, do you need slides for this or not?
No, I don't need slides. I don't.
Okay, perfect. That's fine. Are you ready for your 10-minute rebuttal?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let's get that up on the screen, and your 10-minute rebuttal starts now.
Okay, so first of all, he says that I immediately try to appeal to the German bishops to prove my papal nominalist position. But the issue is that the German bishops that I was quoting from was papally accused by the Pope that presided over the Vatican I. So we cannot just dismiss the German bishop's letter, which proves papal nominalism, because it goes against your argumentation. No, we cannot do that, because the Pope who presided over the council accepted the letter. Now, he mentioned something very important. He said that the tone of Leo was judged. The tone of Leo was indeed judged. Now, let's go to session 2 of the council. Let's see what they say. When we go to session 2 of the council, when we go to the Acts of Father Richard Price, volume 2, page 11, we see this. Florentius, the bishop of Sardis, says, since improvising about the faith is impossible for those taught to follow the Holy Council of Nicaea and the one that was rightly and piously convened at Ephesus, in accordance with the faith of the Holy Father Cyril and Celestine and the letters of the Most Holy Leo, we beg your greatness to grant us postponement, so that we may attain the truth of the matter with an appropriate plan. Although indeed, as regards ourselves, who have signed the letter of the Most Sacred Leo, we stand in no need of correction. So, what do we see here? We see something very important here. We see that the bishops who wanted a postponement of 5 days say that they need to study the faith. And what do they also do? They put the tone on the same authority as the previous 2 ecumenical councils. Now, why is he doing that? I thought the tone needed to be judged. The tone needed to be judged. The tone, wait, can you pause the time? I think people are having issues because I think there's ads playing or something.
Yeah, pause the timer. I have pinned a comment in the chat. If you are I don't know what's happened with YouTube. It seems to have enabled ads on the live stream without my permission. So if you are on desktop and you're using Chrome or you're willing to download Brave browser, download that. Install uBlock Lite, I believe it is, on Chrome, and that you can have ad-free YouTube. Or you can use Brave browser on your mobile and just watch that way. My deepest apologies. I am very sorry, but I can't change it as I've gone live. I'm really very sorry. It wasn't my intention to set up ads, and so hopefully we're back in the room now. Do you want me to take it back to 7 minutes 30?
No, it's all good.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
All right then, no worries. All right then, and I'll resume the timer now.
Yeah, so as I was saying, the Tonal Rio was already regarded as having the same authority as the two previous ecumenical councils, which would be impossible given that the two ecumenical councils obviously are infallible and at the highest authority when it comes to theological matters in the church, which means that the Tonal Rio was indeed infallible as it was regarded as the same authority. But as I mentioned, the bishops who were advocating for a 5-day interval in order that they might attain the truth of the matter, they say this: although indeed as regards ourselves who have signed the letter of the most sacred Leo, we stand in no need of correction. So clearly the bishops who have already signed the Tonal Rio are in no need of correction, and this directly points to the fact that it wasn't the tone that needed to be corrected, but it was the bishops who were doubting the tone that needed to be corrected. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense for the bishops to say that we are in no need of correction because we agree to the tone. Now, he mentioned Dioscorus of Alexandria. He mentioned the fact that Dioscorus of Alexandria wasn't deposed because the Bishop of Rome judged him or excommunicated him or anything like that. But the interesting thing is, when we go to the reasons why Dioscorus of Alexandria was deposed, we see that there is one reason that is superior to all the other reasons as to why they wanted to depose him. And this is what they say in session 3, volume 2, page 70 of the Acts of Chalcedon. They say, but he has greatly surpassed his first crimes with his later ones, and had the presumption to pronounce excommunication against the most holy and sacred Archbishop of Great Rome. So there we have it. We have the reason for why they wanted to depose Dioscorus in the first place. Why did they want to depose him? They wanted to depose him because he excommunicated the Archbishop of Rome. Now, why is it that they wanted to depose him? Because he excommunicated the Archbishop of Rome. As a matter of fact, isn't there excommunications that go on today? The Bishop of Moscow excommunicated the Bishop of Constantinople. He didn't need to be deposed. But when we go to the Council of Chalcedon, the Bishop of Alexandria was deposed because he excommunicated the Bishop of Rome, which means that he was deposed from the episcopate because he went against Leo. Now, this obviously proves papal supremacy, because the Pope indeed cannot be judged by anyone. So if anyone tries to judge him, then consequences are going to follow, as we see with Dioscorus, the Bishop of Alexandria. Consequences immediately followed when someone tried to judge him, and that happened with Dioscorus. Now, look, when he mentioned Canon 28, and he mentioned that, oh well, yeah, the Pope rejected it, and the Pope rejected it, and it was still received. But this is not what Saint Anatolius, the Bishop of Constantinople, whose see was indeed being exalted by this very canon. The Archbishop of Constantinople says this: let your blessedness know for certain that there is no fault in me, a man who has always loved leisure and quiet, keeping myself in humility from my youth. Rather, it was the most reverend clergy of the Constantinopolitan Church who pursued this matter, along with the most religious priests of these regions who were in agreement. And the full force of the acts and their consummation was reserved entirely for the authority of your blessedness. This is the Bishop of Constantinople. He's saying it wasn't my fault. It was their fault for wanting to do this canon. I didn't want this canon. they pursued to do this canon without the Archbishop's authority. And according to his paradigm, for something to pass in an ecumenical council, it needs the approval of all the archbishops. So, if Canon 28 was indeed valid, then why did the Bishop of Constantinople himself not even accept this canon? As a matter of fact, he said that the full source of the acts and their consternation was reserved entirely to the authority of your blessedness. So clearly, the approval or the acceptance of Canon 28 was contingent upon the Bishop of Rome's approval. So if you're telling me that the church still went on and accepted it anyway, then they're disobeying the rules, because the rules clearly state that whatever is contrary to the judgment of the Bishop of Rome is automatically null and void. And this is what the Bishop of Constantinople was saying. This is what the Bishop of Constantinople was saying. He's saying that the full acts and condemnation were reserved entirely for your authority. So if the Pope rejected that canon, then the canon should not be practiced in the Eastern Orthodox Church, according to their own principle. And what else did he mention? He mentioned Canon 28 Order 3, which I just addressed. He mentioned Dioscorus, his deposition. He mentioned the Tongian scrutinized, judged, which I addressed. So yeah, I think I'm done. I think I'm done with my with my gossip zones.
Perfect. That's fine. We'll stop the timer there, and we'll get that back over into 10 minutes for your 10-minute rebuttal. True. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Great stuff. All right, then let me switch back on the timer, and your 10-minute rebuttal starts.
So to address recency bias, we'll start with Anatolius. First off, if Jason read the Acts, Anatolius signed Canon 28. In fact, it is explicitly stated in the Greek and Latin manuscripts, quote, Anatolius, bishop of the majestic city of Constantinople, New Rome, defined this decree, agreeing with it, and have signed it. So he was pressured by Leo, obviously being such an influential and important person and amazing person that St. Pope Leo was, to basically walk this back when later backlash would occur. This is what the scholars agree on. And let's get into maybe just reiterating what I said, but with more evidences. So let's read Vatican I, or one quote from Vatican I. Quote, the sentence of the Apostolic See, then, which there is no higher authority, is not subject to revision by anyone, nor may anyone lawfully pass judgment thereupon. So this session 4, chapter 3 of Vatican I. So irrespective of what Jason or any other papal apologist says, this is what the Vatican I says. This is Ultramontanism. Again, in regard to the Tome of St. Leo, when reading the Acts, we find 20 pages of judgment. Some of them weak, some of them strong. One of the greatest examples, which I'm sure all you Catholics have heard already, quote, Eusebius, the most devout bishop of Dorylaeum, said, I judge the letter of the most holy Archbishop of Senior Rome to accord with the definition of the 318 fathers who assembled in Nicaea, with the council of the 150 who assembled in the great city of Constantinople, and with the council that took place at Ephesus under the blessed Cyril, and I have signed it, close quote. I'm going to walk you through this quote because this is actually devastating. 1, he says he judges. 2, he says senior Rome, which implies that there is a new Rome, namely Constantinople, as Canon 8 says. As Canon 28 says. Also, what is he used for the criterion to justify Pope Leo's tome? The definition of Nicaea and the definition of Constantinople. And what else? Ephesus under St. Cyril. So again, aside from special pleading, this is the historical fact demonstrating Orthodox conciliarity. If Ultramontanism was true, Jason would be defending it, but it's not true. And this is why they always have to backpedal and walk it back. That way it becomes a worldview that is somewhat digestible. This is explicitly against the prior quote of Vatican I, quote, nor may anyone lawfully pass judgment thereupon. Maybe I'm illiterate, but it explicitly says no one may pass judgment upon the first see. Since we see another quote, read this, quote, since we see the divine gospels displayed by your devoutness, let each of the most devout bishops assembled state if the definition of the 318 fathers who met formally at Nicaea and of the 150 who convened subsequently in the imperial city is in harmony with the letter of the most devout Archbishop Leo. Key word, if, and let each of the most devout bishops assembled state if the definition of the 318 fathers, etc., etc. Again, pointing towards direct judgment over St. Leo's tome. This is Orthodox conciliarity. St. Leo the Great, in letter 120, states himself that the council had ultimate authority. He even says that the council contained debates, judgments, and ultimately an examination of his tome according to the council's standard, which we already said is the prior councils and St. Cyril's teachings. He, in fact, says that the Council of Chalcedon, quote, ratified his tome, close quote. And I really want to nail this down. Ratification implies that the body that is ratifying something has authority over that said thing. The council confirmed, so to speak, his tome as orthodox, not the other way around. In other words, the tome, by this criterion of the council and the prior councils, was deemed orthodox, and the council was not deemed orthodox because of St. Leo's tome. So again, the criterion of Vatican I is not there, but the criterion of conciliarity is. Furthermore, he says, quote, what had been first formulated by the foremost see of Christendom, of course referring to himself, and then received by judgment of the whole Christian world, close quote. Remember Vatican I, the apostolic see, than which there is no higher authority, is not subject to revision by anyone, nor may anyone lawfully pass judgment thereupon, close quote. And again, open quote, if anyone says that the Roman pontiff has merely an office of supervision and guidance and not the full and supreme power of jurisdiction over the whole church, let him be anathema, close quote. This suggests that the great Pope St. Leo should have been anathematized? No. He himself in letter 120 says that he does not have the full jurisdiction over the whole church, but instead that it was received by what? By judgment. He explicitly says it was received. Okay, that's great. How was it received, Pope Leo? Well, it was received by judgment. Let's get into honorifics, which I thought, I'm surprised that Jason didn't dive into a little further, but I think this is actually really interesting. I'm glad papists are avoiding these arguments because they're really bad. If we go about reading the preface, oh my God, I really can't read, the preface of the Acts of Chalcedon, excuse me, guys. In one of the first pages, I got to flip to it. He says, Richard Price says, quote, we are careful about consistency in the translation of honorifics. English superlative forms are generally clumsier than their Greek and Latin equivalents. And I would have liked to lighten the texture by eliminating every occurrence of most, but that would have sacrificed some intriguing distinctions, etc., etc. And then he goes on to say, this is super important, it is ironic that in this way, the superlative actually weakens the meaning. What is he talking about? Where he's saying archbishops are the most holy, councils are holy, by implication more holy than archbishops, and when applied to persons, the simple positive is less stereotyped than the superlative. Again, and then he finishes this saying, it is ironic that in this way, superlative actually weakens the meaning. So in other words, if we say the most amazing, blessed, holy, amazing apostle, Jason III, it's actually, ironically, according to the man who translated this from Greek and Latin, lesser and weakens the meaning than just simply saying Jason, which is why the council is holy, but the archbishops are most holy, which is his exact example. Another thing that I thought was rather interesting was that St. John Chrysostom, I think he's a ultramontanist, but instead of the Church of Rome, maybe of Antioch, because he says Antioch is the head of the whole world. Oh no, so I guess we all have to submit to Antioch, right? Well, no, it's obviously not what he meant. It's flowery language. And interestingly, he used the example of Theodoret. Theodoret tells Dioscorus that Alexandria is the, quote, apostolic throne. Okay, so again, if we're utilizing the same criterion that makes Rome have this authority over the other churches, well, the same people you appeal to also utilize that same language for other patriarchs. Another interesting thing, which I really want to restate, I know I already said it, but this is super important. Maybe you can explain to me how this makes sense, but Richard Price himself says that Dioscorus in Ephesus were never explicitly rejected on grounds of heresy, but rather on lawlessness and violence. By the way, a very poorly put together council to excommunicate the Pope of Rome without good cause would be lawless, which is exactly what your Catholic scholar says. And the other major thing, which I think we can't really undermine, and I really want to reiterate this, Vatican I, if you read it word for word, is holding to an ultramontanist view that no one will judge the first see, that no one has authority over the first see. And yet I've showed you multiple times, not my words, not some random saint's words, literally word for word translation of the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, where they collectively state that Leo's tome was judged by the criterion of Orthodox conciliarity. With that, I will go into the next stage.
Okay, perfect. Let's sort that timer out and let's bring it back to us. Fantastic. Right. Well, this debate is absolutely flying by, and we are now entering into the 20-minute cross-examination stage. This is probably everyone's favorite part of debates, where our two debate champions can go head-to-head and see who comes out on top. So I think it's also been agreed that the person who is leading the cross-examination can interrupt the other person, just to keep them on track with the question. So, for instance, if Jason is leading the cross-examination, which he will be in a second, he can interrupt True, and likewise, True can interrupt Jason as well. Points of clarification can be put back towards the main leader. So if they're wanting clarification on the meaning of a word or a phrase or something like that, then they can do that. However, the person who is leading the cross-examination is in charge. So are you both ready? I see, Jason, have you got slides for this section?
Indeed.
Okay,
oh, man, he's going to cook me. He got slides.
He's bringing the smoke. Right, love it. Right, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put myself back onto the timer. I'm going to switch that out to 20 minutes. So that's now done. Jason and True, are you ready to start?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Okay, great stuff. So, Jason, your 20-minute cross-examination starts now.
My first question, Mr. True Patristic Path. When Saint Flavian says, "For the matter only requires your weight and support, which through your wisdom will at once bring about general peace and quietness, for thus both the heresy which has arisen and the disorder it has excited will easily be appeased by God's assistance through a letter from you, and the ruined synod will also be prevented." Do you agree with Saint Flavian that all that was needed to settle the entire controversy of Eutychianism, to suppress the heresy, and even to prevent the intended ecumenical councils from taking place of Ephesus II, could only be settled by the Pope's letter? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, this is because Eutychides himself states that if the Pope says something, that he will abide by it.
Okay, but when Saint Flavian sends a letter to Saint Leo, he sends a letter because Leo received a letter from Eutyches full of lies and basically slandering Saint Flavian. So Saint Flavian isn't sending a letter because he thinks Eutyches will listen. He's sending a letter because he doesn't want this ecumenical council to take place, because he thinks that a simple letter from Pope St. Leo would settle everything. Do you agree that a letter of the Pope could settle everything rather than the intended ecumenical council? Do you believe that a Pope is above an ecumenical council?
Yeah, again, in one of Pope Leo's letters, I need to find the exact source. He himself states that Eutychides was going to change his mind based upon whether he affirms it or not. And obviously, Eutychides, the second that he didn't affirm his heresy, appealed to the Pope of Alexandria, Dioscorus. So Pope Leo himself, let me find that quote for you, maybe while you're continuing, explicitly states that this is how it would be settled. And obviously, Eutychides was just posturing in hopes that the Pope would agree with him.
Yeah,
But
I'm talking about Saint Flavian. He's saying that an ecumenical council isn't needed.
yes, the context of this. Go ahead.
An ecumenical council isn't needed because the Pope can settle the issue with one letter. So this is after Saint Flavian or Eutyches had already appealed to an ecumenical council.
Yeah. So again, Eutychides himself states that if Leo speaks on the matter, he will abide by
but
it.
this has nothing to do with Eutyches agreeing. Saint Flavian is responding to the accusations of Eutyches because he slandered him. And Saint Flavian is saying that Saint Leo is all that's needed for the entire controversy to go away.
Yes, because that's what Eutychides says himself.
Okay, and then I don't think you're understanding. Eutyches isn't sending, or Saint Flavian isn't sending a letter because Eutyches said so. He's sending a letter because he's responding to the slanders of Eutyches. And when Eutyches is slandering him, Saint Flavian is defending himself. And when Saint Flavian defends himself, he's asking for Pope Saint Leo to endorse his judgment because his judgment would supersede that of an ecumenical council. Do you believe that the Pope's judgment supersedes that of an ecumenical council? Yes or no?
No, I think what's being implied here is that the rumored synod will be prevented, not necessarily an ecumenical council.
And what was that rumored synod?
In this case, wasn't it Ephesus 2?
Okay, and was Ephesus 2 meant to be ecumenical?
According to Richard Price, no, it was always something that was being utilized by Dioscorus to control the church.
No. I'm asking. What? Oh, nice. 1 second. Wait, pause the time, please.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Pausing the timer. So just while we wait for Jason to come back, make sure you get your questions in, guys. We have just one question so far. So if you do have a question to pose to either of our panelists, ideally it would be great if we can get equal questions for both sides. However, if that's not possible, then we will do our best. But I hope you guys are enjoying the debate so far, and I hope that it's educational at least. Just while we're waiting on Jason to come back. I had people in the chat complaining of your lack of pictures, Drew.
I'm back. I'm back. So
Welcome back.
Right, I'm going to resume the timer in 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, since you agreed that the intended ecumenical council was the ecumenical council of Ephesus 2, Saint Flavian is saying that the judgment of Rio would present that ecumenical synod. So do you believe that the Pope's judgment is more authoritative than the intended ecumenical synod? Yes or no?
No, I don't think that's what Flavian's saying here.
Okay, but if he's saying that Leo's judgment would prevent the intended synod, and that synod was the ecumenical council of Ephesus 2, then that's exactly what he's saying.
Yeah, so what the context is that they're trying to avoid Ephesus 2, which would essentially allow Dioscorus and Eutychides to run free over St. Flavian, who in the first place, as Richard Price says, didn't even want to pursue this deposition of Eutychides. Furthermore, I found the quote, Leo letter 23 in section 2 says, and no difficulty can arise on this side, since the said presbyter has professed himself by his own statement, ready to be corrected if anything be found in him worthy of rebuke. So, like I said, Flavian is saying about Eutychides that Eutychides said he'll change his mind if Leo says so, which obviously he didn't do.
Yeah, so. That's fine. That's fine. My second question to you is, do you agree with Pope St. Leo's do you agree with Pope St. Leo on his view on the authority of the apostles when he says, among the blessed apostles, notwithstanding the similarity of their honorable estate, there was a certain distinction of power, and while the election was then all was equal, yet it was given to one to take the lead of the rest? Do you agree with St. Leo that there was a certain distinction of power between the apostles?
Yeah, there's of course everyone believes that St. Peter held primacy. This is undisputed.
No, but wait. So you agree that St. Peter had more authority of the over the apostles, and not just the primacy of honor?
Yeah. So to understand this properly, what does he say in the last sentence? Yet it was given to one to take the lead of the rest. So St. Peter was to take the lead of the church. However, for an example, if you read the Bible, in the Council of Jerusalem, St. Peter's kind of sitting in the background while St. James presides over the council. So we see that although he is the leader, at times he will take his place as a good leader would do. I don't see how that contradicts the Orthodox conciliar view.
Wait, but the Orthodox view is that all the apostles were equal in their power. Only Peter had only St. Peter had a primacy of honor, not a primacy of power.
He had a primacy of power, but he didn't have a primacy that could totally usurp if everyone else disagreed.
I'm not talking about that kind of primacy.
Okay.
I'm talking about the primacy in general. You believe that he had the primacy of honor, right?
Yeah. And
okay,
power,
but he's saying he doesn't though.
No, I'm saying and of power, just not in the way in which Vatican I has stated it, which I think all Orthodox Christians would agree with. Is just, pause the time, reason, belief. I think Jason had to go real quick.
Yeah, I'll pause the time.
Sorry.
It's all right, no worries.
Want to be fair to my boy. He's always been fair to me.
No, that's all good. No, that's fair enough. Yeah, the chat's been roasting your slides. True, patristic faith, lack of pictures.
Yeah, sorry about that. So,
hang on, let me resume the timer. 3, 2, 1, go.
So, like I said, the Orthodox Church teaches that all the apostles had equal power, but that's not what that's not what Pope St. Leo the Great is saying. He's saying that there was a distinction of power between the apostles. So, how can you agree with Leo?
Yeah, again, all Orthodox all Orthodox works on this topic all agree unanimously that St. Peter held primacy, even that of power, just not in the way in which.
No. That's not true. He only held the primacy of honor, not of power.
Can you demonstrate this?
Yeah, I can demonstrate this. 1 second. Could you pause the time while I get it up?
Yep, pause the timer for you. We're just waiting for Jason to find the quote. There's no rush, Jason. Good to see you, Orthodox Philip, as well. God bless you. And I have another question to add to the pile. That's great. I'll add that in. Do make sure you get your questions in, guys, as well. we have plenty of time for Q&A after the closing statements.
Okay, so I got the source. So when you go to the patriarchal encyclical of Constantinople from 1722, they say there shall consequently wait 1 second. Where is this?
1722.
Yeah, 1722. It says but the apostles had all things commonly and equally from Christ.
Yeah.
So if they had all things equally from Christ, then I'm confused how Saint Leo is saying that there's a distinction of power between the apostles if they're all equal in authority, according to the patriarchal encyclicals of the Eastern Orthodox Church. How can you agree with this?
Right, because this is just Orthodox conciliarity. There needs to be a nuance. Like for an example, another encyclical, 1848, they basically agree with this. In a different way, though, they state that no single bishop is the infallible guardian of the faith. However, if you read the saints, like Saint Maximus, for example, he says that the entire earth looks upon the Roman Church for its confession and its faith. I'm paraphrasing Theodore the Studite, right? He says to Peter or his successor, must of necessity every novelty in the Catholic Church be referred. Like everyone agrees that the Bishop of Rome held primacy also of power, just again, not in the way in which Vatican I states it, namely not being able to be judged by anyone else. That's the point of contention, is that you have authoritative jurisdiction over the entire church unilaterally.
And then that's interesting. Another so the patriarchal encyclical of 1848 and 1895, they make it very clear that all the bishops were equal and all the bishops were subject to the judgment of councils. And
right,
if but if they're saying that they're all equal and subject to judgment of councils, then why is Saint Leo saying that there's a certain distinction of power between the bishops and the apostles? You don't agree that there's a certain distinction of power between the apostles. You believe that they're all equal in authority. You just believe that they're distinct in honor.
Yeah, but read his quote. He literally says that the honorable estate, there was a certain distinction of power, comma, and while the election of them was all equal, it was given to one to take the lead of the rest. This is Orthodox conciliarity. You have one bishop, namely the Pope, right, who had this special, let's say, role in the church to help the other bishops. But this doesn't mean that in times of decision-making, they acted unilaterally as Vatican I states. I understand Vatican I doesn't state that the Bishop of Rome has to act unilaterally, but that he does have the power to do so. So that's the contention. No one believed that he had the power to do so. They all believed in Orthodox conciliarity. Pope St. Leo in letter 22 says the same thing. Continue.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I mean, I don't know where you get that from, but we can move on to the next question. So my next question is, we are told by Canon 6 of Constantinople 382 that bishops who have been deposed aren't allowed to act as accusers against bishops in good standing unless they have been cleared. If that's so, how were Theodora and Eusebius of Dorylaeum allowed to act as accusers of Dioscorus if they had been deposed at Ephesus too?
Because they were reinstated.
And who were they reinstated by?
Richard Price says the council reinstates them because they signed the Tome of St. Leo. Okay,
but according to Chalcedon, Theodora Osiris was only judged in session 8, but this is in session 1 where he's taken the role of accuser. And according to Canon 6 of the Constantinopolitan Synod of 382, a bishop who has been deposed cannot act as an accuser until they have been cleared.
Absolutely. So I can find the quote for you.
Yeah, Wait, if Theodora reinstated, or if Chalcedon reinstated session 8 in session, if Chalcedon reinstated Theodora in session 8, then how is he acting as the role of accuser in session 1? How is he doing that?
Yeah, they were reinstated. Let me find you where Richard Price says this, because this is the only way I'm going to be able to answer it directly. But let's see.
Could you pause the time?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
This is a shame that I don't have this off the top of my head, but
wait. Actually, you can resume the time. So look, I know what you're saying. You're saying that Theodoret was reinstated, but where they judged Theodoret was in session 8, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this is session 1. And according to the canon, bishops aren't allowed to act as an accuser if they haven't been reinstated after being deposed. So how is Theodoret acted as an accuser if he wasn't restored until session 8?
They famously crossed the aisle and were reinstated, and then they still proceeded with the planned proceedings anyways. I mean, I don't see the contradiction.
Okay, so you're saying that the Council of Chalcedon broke canon law by allowing a deposed bishop to act as an accuser.
I'm saying that because of the means in which he was deposed, they reinstated him and then decided that the council would judge them in a correct manner.
But you're saying the council reinstated him in session 8, but this is session 1, and according to the canons, a deposed bishop cannot act as the judge or accuser of the bishop in good standing. So how is he acting as accuser if he wasn't reinstated until session 8? That means Pope St. Leo reinstated him prior to the council, correct?
No, let me find you the quote. This is what I'm saying. This is actually important enough where I should find the quote for you really quick. Because there was multiple people.
No, you don't need the quote. You just agreed to me that in session 8 that they reinstated Leo or reinstated Theodoret, but in session 1 he's already seen as reinstated. So who reinstated him?
Yeah, that's my point. Is that the council collectively reinstated him for the duration?
No, but he was only reinstated in session 8. This is in session 1.
He was officially reinstated in session 8.
Wait, how can he be officially reinstated in session 8 but act as an accuser in session 1? If that's only allowed for bishops who are not deposed? How?
Because in the same manner, Nestorius was allowed to be heard, even though he was already condemned.
He wasn't deposed though. This is a different situation with Theodoret Osiris. He was deposed by Ephesus too, but somehow he's allowed to have the role of an archbishop in session 1. And the only way we know that he was reinstated was by his appeal to Pope St. Leo. So did Pope St. Leo reinstate him or not?
This is what I'm saying. I believe that Richard Price directly addresses this. I'm trying to look for the quote because it's in the
we can move on to the next question. So do you think when Pope St. Leo annulled Canon 28 of Chalcedon, was he exercising universal authority?
I imagine that's what he thought he was doing. That's what Richard Price says he thought he was doing.
Okay, but did he actually do it in the end? Like, was it accepted?
No.
Okay, if it wasn't accepted, then why does St. Anatolius, who is the Bishop of Constantinople, say himself that the full authority and the consummation of the acts was entirely reserved for the authority of Pope St. Leo?
Yeah, I already addressed this. He literally signed the document and
okay, but I'm not asking about whether he signed or not. I'm asking about after the synod. He says that the contingency of Canon 28 being accepted was entirely reserved for the Bishop of Rome. Do you agree with this?
Right, but again, he would be contradicting himself. He obviously is being pressured into saying something.
Okay, so he's just so he doesn't mean it. It's just flowery language, right? He doesn't actually.
No, it's not flowery language. It's actually him being a coward and not properly addressing Leo.
Damn, this is that's crazy. Okay, I guess we can move on to the next question. So when St. Leo says, but this mysterious function the Lord wished to be indeed the concern of all the apostles. 1 second. Sorry. Yeah, but the mysterious function that the Lord wished to be indeed the concern of all the apostles, but in such a way that he has placed the principal charge on the blessed apostle Peter, and from him, as from the head wishes his gifts to flow to all the body. Do you agree with St. Leo that the gifts of the episcopacy flow forth from Peter?
I'm not gonna lie. Read the important part again, not the whole thing, just the important part.
Yeah, and from him, as from the head wishes his gifts to flow to all the body. So from Peter, it goes from Peter to all the body. Do you agree with that?
I think he's referring to, because if you continue reading, so that anyone who dares to secede from Peter's solid rock may understand that he has no part or lot in the divine mystery. I mean, this just sounds like a conciliar. Anyone who disagrees with the church as held by Peter and the apostles, right?
No, no. It's talking about the gifts that come with the episcopacy. Do you agree that it goes from Peter to the other apostles?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't agree with that language. I think that's not necessarily what we're reading here.
And he literally says, as from him, from the head wishes his gift to flow to all the body. Do you believe that it goes from Peter to all the body?
Interesting. So you notice the capital H and the capital H again. He's referring to Christ.
Wait, how? What? Okay, okay. On the blessed Peter, chief of all the apostles, and from him, he needs also to be the subject that is referenced last.
Yep.
His gifts flow to all the body. Do you believe it? Do you believe that?
I see. I apologize. You're right. I retract my prior statement. I mean, this is what Pope Leo's saying. I wouldn't agree with that. I think that the Council of Chalcedon also disagrees with this.
Okay, that's good. Okay. So my last question is, if the Pope or if the tone didn't have supreme authority, then why was it already on par with the previous 3 ecumenical councils at the start of session 2?
Yeah, I think the way you worded it made it sound like that, but that is definitely not the view of the bishops, which is self-evident if you read the Acts.
Okay, I mean, sure. I mean, if you want to say that, but it's all good.
That's my view, brother.
But yeah, it's all good. Man. If you want to reject Leo, even though you're bound to his letters, it's fine. But yeah,
we love Leo over here, man.
We can go to your questions.
Absolutely. Just give me 1 second, reason belief, so I could grab my little script over here.
Absolutely, no worries.
Thank you.
I'll go back over to the face cam. Certainly fiery at times, but that's the whole point of cross-examination.
I love this guy. I have no issues with Jason. All right, I'm ready to start whenever you gentlemen are. You ready, Jason?
Yes.
All right. I won't have
All
slides
right.
as he does, so please excuse me, gentlemen. And one lady in the audience. Anyways, ready when you are.
All right, and your 20-minute cross-examination starts now.
So one of the proofs for papal jurisdiction that you wanted to bring up was Dioscorus, the deposition of Dioscorus. What does Richard Price mean when he says that Dioscorus and Ephesus too were never explicitly condemned as heretical, but rejected on grounds of lawlessness and violence?
And he means what it says, what he says. What could I say?
Right. So he's saying that they're explicitly condemned based off of Pope Leo or something else.
Well, I would just have to disagree with Father Richard Price here, because the council in session 2 or session 4 of the council clearly says that Dioscorus was condemned because he tried to excommunicate Leo.
Right. So when they read the official statement of excommunication, though, Richard Price, the person who translated and is basically the authority on this, states that the words don't come together in a manner that would explicitly condemn them as heretical, but rather they would be rejected on grounds of lawlessness and violence. I don't see how we could work around that.
Yeah, so I'm not arguing that Dioscorus was condemned because he was heretical. I'm saying that he was condemned because he tried to excommunicate Pope St. Leo the Great, which is what it says in volume 2, page 70 of the Acts of Chalcedon.
Right. So one of the reasons why Dioscorus was getting in trouble was because of this illegitimate deposition of the Pope. But again, that's literally what the word lawless means, which is what Richard Price uses. Nonetheless, we'll move on.
Okay. So you agree with me that it was lawless for him to try to excommunicate the Pope, right?
So the agreement is exactly what Richard Price said, which is that he was rejected on grounds of lawlessness and violence, which would include, obviously, Ephesus 2, what happened to St. Flavian, and a few others, actually, who were beat according to the introduction of the Acts. Nonetheless, let's move on. So another interesting thing, would you agree that St. Leo's tome was judged by the council?
I don't agree that it was judged to see whether its orthodoxy was correct. or whether the tone was Orthodox.
So what did the what did Richard Price mean when he said that the bishops of Chalcedon interpreted Leo's tome according to the teaching of Cyril? And again, when he says that the majority of the council fathers who signed the text assured themselves that the tome didn't expound on any further than the obvious meaning of the Nicene Creed.
And I would.
How is this not a judgment?
Yeah. So when we go to section 2 of the Council of Chalcedon, it says that those who signed the tome prior to the council were in no need of correction. So
yeah, well, obviously because they signed the tome ahead of time.
Okay, if they signed the tome ahead of time, and the council is saying that those who signed the tome ahead of time were in no need of correction, then does this? It obviously points to the council judging the orthodoxy of the persons rather than the orthodoxy of the tome.
So what did it mean for 20 pages when multiple bishops stood up and said, I judge, I assess, I believe, and then utilize the criterion of Nicaea, Constantinople, and St. Cyril to justify the tome of St. Leo? Is that a judgment, or is that merely just them like reading a script that was pre-written or something like that?
It's nearly them doing what the imperial commissioners asked them to do at the start of section 4. At the start of section 4, the imperial commissioners told them to give their thoughts on the tone, even if they had previously agreed to the tone itself. So they weren't doing it because they were judging the tone to see whether it's orthodox or not, but they were doing it because the imperial commissioners simply told them to repeat their stance on the tone.
So would you agree that Eusebius, the devout bishop of Dorylaeum, said literally, quote, I judge the letter of the Most Holy Leo, Archbishop of Senior Rome?
I agree with Eusebius of Dorylaeum, but I don't agree with your interpretation of what judge means. Judge doesn't always mean that they're checking if the content is orthodox or not. Judge could just mean they're acting as a witness. Even when we go to the First Vatican Council, the Bishop of Rome actually invited all the other bishops to come act as judges when he made ex cathedra statements. Does that mean that those judges were judging the content of the ex cathedra statements?
Yeah,
no,
if I'm not mistaken,
that they were judging the ex cathedra statements. It just means that they were acting.
One second, it's my cross-examination. Hold up, Jason. If I'm not mistaken, that was after he tried to unilaterally decree it. But nonetheless, back to Chalcedon. So you're basically saying that.
Wait, are you?
Let's go back. Let's go back to Chalcedon.
What do you mean after he unilaterally agreed to it? They released an ex cathedra statements.
Jason, it's my cross-exam. It's my cross-exam. I was fair to you. So again, going back to Eusebius, the most devout bishop of Dorylaeum, you're saying that he didn't judge St. Leo and that I'm just misinterpreting what he said. But if you continue reading, he says, we judged Leo, Archbishop of Senior Rome, to be in accord with what? To be in accord with a criterion. He's giving a criterion. What do you give a criterion for? Well, for something that needs to be justified or defined. So the Bishop of Dorylaeum is saying, I judged the letter of Archbishop Leo, and it accords with the definition of Nicaea, Constantinople 1, and Ephesus under St. Cyril. So again, Dorylaeum is the Bishop of Dorylaeum, Eusebius, is explicitly stating that he judges the letter and giving you criterion just in case you're confused.
Yeah. As I said, the imperial commissioners told the bishops to give their judgment on the tone, even if they agreed to it. So judgment there is just referring to them witnessing to the orthodoxy of the tone, not that the orthodoxy of the tone was contingent upon them agreeing to it. And for the statement of Eusebius saying that this accords with the previous ecumenical councils and it accords with Cyril, of course he's going to say that. He's not going to say it doesn't accord with it, is it? Like, well, I don't get that critique there.
That's a good point, Jason. Now I have an issue with this. If we use your criterion, the thing that you have to hold to states, quote, the sentence of the apostolic see, than which there is no higher authority, is not subject to revision by anyone, normally anyone lawfully pass judgment thereupon, close quote. Again, if we go back to the quote of Eusebius, who is Leo is the highest authority, there is no higher authority according to Vatican I. What is the Eusebius, the Bishop of Dorylaeum, say? He says, oh, well, it holds in accord with a higher authority, aka Nicaea, Constantinople, and Ephesus. So Vatican the councils, according to Dorylaeum, to Eusebius of Dorylaeum, are above Leo's tome.
Yeah,
This is
Vatican
not Vatican I ecclesiology. Go ahead.
So Vatican One also has judges within those sessions who were judging the ex cathedra statements, were judging the ex cathedra statements of Pastor Eternus. So if you're saying that judgment equates to Vatican One being disproven, then how on earth were the bishops at Vatican One who believed in ex cathedra statements judging an ex cathedra statement?
Well, the beauty in that is that I'm sure that if it really came down to a decision needing to be made, let's say in a tiebreaker, the Pope of Rome would have made that decision unilaterally, and it would have been immediate and binding upon the whole church. Now, again, Vatican I is saying something very important. You're paying attention to the judgment part, but the part you haven't addressed, there is no higher authority. Well, Eusebius of Dorylaeum, as well as like literally 20, 30, 40 bishops are utilizing the criterion of Nicaea, Constantinople, and Ephesus as above the Leo's tome. So how is there a higher authority if Vatican I states that there is no higher authority?
As I said, the ecumenical councils, as listed out in the council's Chalcedon, were literally on the same footing of the tone of Rio at the start of session 2. So if you're saying that the ecumenical councils were seen as higher than the tone of Rio itself, then it wouldn't make sense for the tone of Rio prior to the quote-unquote judgment of it to be on the same authority as those councils. So clearly they were seen as equals in the council, and one wasn't seen as inferior to the other.
I appreciate that. Now, the issue with that is that Richard Price himself, like 10 times, mentions that the criterion for this, for the disagreements within Chalcedon was St. Cyril of Alexandria and the prior councils. This is the gentleman who translated this entire actus for us into English. I believe he is a little bit more authoritative and well-read than you and other papal apologists.
I agree. He is obviously more well-read than most apologists online. But the thing that you got to understand is that the acts that he indeed did translate also say that the tone of Rio was literally on the same authority as Nicaea 1, Constantinople 1, and Ephesus 1. So if you're saying that those councils were superior to the tone, then why is the tone on equal footing with those councils?
My point is that your interpretation is actually what is in question.
It's not my interpretation, it's what the text literally says.
Well, you can say that, but nonetheless, Richard Price disagrees with you. And again, if you read,
so Richard Price disagrees with the text.
One second. And then if you read the rest of the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, many times the bishops repeatedly say that the St. Leo's tome is judged based upon the criterion of the prior councils. Again, your interpretation would not make sense in the sense that the bishops meant it. What the hell do they mean then?
I'm just going what the council says.
Yeah, and I'm going by what the council and Richard Price says, and his interpretation clarifying the text. And so what he says according to the text and his interpretation of it, and also multiple times throughout the council, the bishops' authority were ultimately Cyril, Nicaea, and Constantinople 1. Do you agree with that?
I agree with what the council says in page 11 of volume 2 of the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, when it says that the faith was well defined by the 318 fathers and confirmed by the Holy Fathers Athanasius, Cyril, Celestine, Hilary, Basil, Gregory, and now again by the Most Holy Leo. So prior to the judgment of the tone, the faith was already seen as confirmed by Leo himself. So that means that the tone of Leo was literally on par with the councils.
Richard Price, in his introduction, this is funny you mentioned this, explicitly says that Leo intended for his tome to be dogmatic and binding upon the whole church, but it was hand-waved at Ephesus 2, and at Chalcedon it was judged and scrutinized. This is what your scholars say. Nonetheless, we'll listen to Jason over the scholars, and we'll move on to the next topic that I want to talk about, which is Canon 28. If the Bishop of Rome decrees that something is not the case, is the rest of the church obligated to agree with him?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if that's the case, how is Canon 28 accepted and observed in the East while Rome was still in communion with the East?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because when Pope Saint Leo the Great rejected Canon 28, guess what started happening? The manuscripts which were produced of the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon were only produced with 27 canons. So if Canon 28 was indeed accepted, then why was the Acts of Chalcedon only produced with 27 canons rather than 28 canons? And I already told you that St. Anatolia says that the canon was contingent upon Pope St. Leo's judgment. And Pope St. Leo judged that the canon is null and void. So taking both of them into account, Canon 28 is invalid.
So that I appreciate that. It's actually a good response. Now, the issue with those is twofold. One, we, according to the scholars, Constantinople would very soon after the Council of Chalcedon, and arguably even before that, come to the power that Canon 28 describes. Secondly, I'm not a textual scholar. I don't know exactly why it wasn't preserved or it wasn't admitted in whatever text that we're going to be looking at. However, it is explicitly mentioned multiple times in 28 or 30 footnotes I was going over last night by Richard Price himself. So you can't just hand wave it as some sort of a legitimate thing, because it was literally observed not only in Richard Price's translation of the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, but also by the entire church historically, and still is. Now, the main issue that I have is if Pope Leo the Great, which is the Archbishop of Rome, who's supposed to have a charism of Peter that is infallible and has this ordinary, immediate, and universal jurisdiction over the whole church, decreed something, why would the entire church completely disagree with it? Which we can see, for an example, Anatolius that you keep appealing to. He himself explicitly says, as I read, that he is the seat of New Rome and that he has declared and he has agreed to Canon 28. How are we going to get around that when that came prior to him backpedaling his statement so that Leo is appeased?
My answer to that would be that, well, first of all, St. Anatolius, we're going to take what he says as very authoritative. And he says that if the canon is rejected by Rome, then it's null and void, because the entire authority of the council was contingent upon Rome's acceptance.
So why did he sign it?
Why did he sign it?
Yeah, because the papal legates were vehemently arguing that we should not sign this damn paper, and then he went ahead and signed it anyways.
Yeah, I'm not sure why he signed it, but
okay.
I'm not sure why he signed it.
Well, it's because he was backpedaling his prior statement.
Okay, yeah. If he backpedaled, then he backpedaled. He still says what he says,
right? But that doesn't. But that's not going to change what he says. That he's wrong in this instance, which is totally okay for our patriarchs to be wrong in certain instances.
Okay, I would say that he wasn't wrong, because, as recorded by the ecclesiastical historians during that time, i.e., Chalcedon and Socrates Scholasticus, they say that whatever decision is made that is contrary to the judgment of the Bishop of Rome is null and void. And these were canon lawyers. So if the canon lawyers are talking about a principle that says that whatever is rejected by Rome is to be rejected by the whole church, then I'm just going to say that St. Anatolius is following that principle and implementing it into his decision of rejecting Canon 28.
Now, the issue with that is, let's say that is the case. Okay, where do we see that? We simply don't. In the East, they proceed with Canon 28. They proceed to give Constantinople more and more power throughout history, which again, Price, Gaddis, and the entire 20-some-odd team of scholars who worked on the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon agree that this is the case, that Constantinople, very shortly after Chalcedon, rose to the power that Canon 28 said. So you want me to believe something that is literally the opposite of reality itself. Reality states that Constantinople rose up to the place in which it said it was going to in Canon 28. You're telling me that Canon 28 is annulled because of the Pope of Rome. How does that make sense?
Yeah, so you asked a very good question. You asked me, where do we see the principle, where do we see the principle of Rome's agreement being necessary for judgment to pass? Well, we see it, as I said, with Saint Anatolius of Constantinople when he says, "And the full source of the acts and their condemnation was reserved entirely for the authority of your blessedness." But that isn't going to change. That isn't going to change. Saint
Again,
Anatolius
so
still
why
says what
don't
he
we
says.
see that in history? Anatolius could say whatever he wants. He could say that maybe he could.
So he's just making stuff up now. Is that what you're telling me?
It's not only that; it's that in this
It's not
instance,
only that. Wow.
yes,
So
I'll
he's doing more.
elaborate. Saint Anatolius is backpedaling because he's being pressured, just like many other councils, so-called, or other events in church history between the East and the West. This is not new, and also the historians, again, which you still haven't addressed, agree that Canon 28 did what it said it was going to do. So how is a legal, irreverent canon that was not allowed by the Pope of Rome and by his legates during the council, how did it effectually work phenomenologically in the world where Constantinople now literally had the power that it said it was going to have?
Yeah, that would just mean that the Eastern churches were disobeying the principle that had been agreed upon in the Greek ecclesiological atmosphere. And as I said,
listen. Wait, I want to focus on that, Jason. This is my cross exam. This is my cross exam. We'll have time after. I have 1 minute, so this is important. Listen to what he said, guys. So now it's either everyone else is wrong and Rome is right, or Canon 28, which was actually effectualized in space and time, Constantinople rose to primacy in the sense that it said it was going to. Either one or the other. So look at reality and look at his claim. It is completely special pleading to say that all of the other patriarchates who signed this were wrong and Rome was right in this case, when Canon 28 literally happened in real time. This is like denying the resurrection. In a sense. It literally happened.
Yeah, I'm not denying that Canon 28 still went through. I'm just saying that they disobeyed, and I'm not special pleading because I literally showed you the principle of whatever is contrary to the judgment of the Bishop of Rome is null and void.
But the East didn't believe that.
Wait, how did the East not believe that?
Because they passed Canon 28.
No, they did believe that, which is what they used to justify the condemnation of Athanasius being completely null and void. They said it was null and void because Athanasius's deposition was reversed by the Bishop of Rome.
That's all I have. But yeah, my point is that they passed Canon 28. But I appreciate that back and forth, Jason. That was good, man.
That was certainly lively. And that's just what we like in the cross exams. Don't forget, get your questions in, guys. We are almost at Q&A time. We have 5-minute closing statements now. And up first is Jason. So Jason will deliver his 5-minute closing argument, and then True will deliver his 5-minute closing argument as well. Jason, are you ready for your 5-minute closing?
Well, I just wanted to ask, would you mind going first, Nathaniel?
You started first, so I gotta end. That's only fair.
I'll start. So so as we saw during the debate, he couldn't reconcile his position with what Chalcedon actually says. So all he had to do is quote Father Richard Price. Even if Father Richard Price blatantly contradicted what the Council of Chalcedon says, he said he translated it, therefore he must be right. And that's just fallacious reasoning, because just because he's the translator of the Council, it doesn't mean we need to take everything that he says about the Council, because he's not the official interpreter of the Council of Chalcedon. I think my case with papal supremacy was sufficiently substantiated, and I think the evidence that I've shown for Rome being the arbiter of what goes through in a council and what doesn't go through in a council was proven. I think I proved that Theodoret was indeed reinstated by Pope St. Leo due to his universal jurisdiction, because he was allowed to act as an accuser in session 1 contra Dioscorus, even though the canons don't permit this, because they say that the canons they say that the bishops who has been deposed cannot act as a judge. But anyhow, I think all of you guys saw that in the debate itself, so I don't need to reiterate what I said. But I want to thank the host for hosting the debate. It was very generous of you. As many of you may not know, it was meant to be hosted by Rex J, but due to some issues, he couldn't host it anymore.
Yeah, my bad.
But due to some issue, he couldn't host it anymore. But thankfully, we found Reason and Release, who happened to be on my live, and he offered to be the host. So I'm truly grateful for him hosting the debate. I'm truly grateful for Nathaniel, who, prior to us even discussing this, he didn't know anything about Chalcedon. He was the one that challenged me and wanted to test his knowledge on the council's Chalcedon. So I wanna commend him for actually taking the time to study the council's Chalcedon, so we could formally debate it. He studied it for 2 months, and and he agreed to debate, despite him not even knowing anything about it prior to Lent. So I wanna thank him to the debate as well. So, and I wanna thank the audience. I wanna thank Hashem, first of all, because he is the reason that we're all here. Hashem is the reason that we're all living and breathing. But yes, I wanna So yeah, thank you to the debate, and God bless.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You didn't have to thank me in your closing statement, but it's very much appreciated, Jason.
We love you. Thank you.
Well, I aim to please anyway. Right. Okay. So we're going to move on to your closing argument. True, as Jason started, he is entitled to end and have the final word. So I'm just going to reset this timer, and then if you're ready, True, I'll start the timer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Your 5-minute closing argument begins now.
I'm going to very briefly recap. However, I think it would be very rude of me to not at least be a little nice, since Jason was so kind. So first off, I want to really go back to the major point, which is that according to Vatican I, it's a very high burden. When I talked to Jason and he agreed to this debate, he knew it was a high burden. And nonetheless, he thought he could defend it, and I think he defended it well. However, I think the Council of Chalcedon, if you notice, my arguments were literally just using the words within the council. The council demonstrates a judgment. It demonstrates that the Pope of Rome does not have the absolute fullness of the supreme power, as Vatican I says, nor does it show that he has ordinary, immediate, or universal jurisdiction over the church. This actually demonstrates the contrary. Well, how does it do that? Well, to reiterate, it demonstrates that because over and over and over, the Tome of St. Leo the Great, which is a very beautiful work, was scrutinized. Parts of it were seen to be poorly written. Richard Price himself says, hey, look, parts of this was actually poorly written. He didn't understand it as well as St. Cyril. Also, he goes in further by saying that many people were worried that he was teaching Nestorianism, which, of course, we found out in the end that he was actually teaching Orthodox Christology. However, the criterion for his Orthodox Christology was the homoousios of Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed and of St. Cyril's teaching. Most importantly, his letters to Nestorius. The other thing is Canon 28 was passed and effectualized. I don't know how we could just get around that. However, I think Jason did a great job trying his best to defend that. I want to say to all the Catholics in the audience, the biggest question I have for you that you could think about in your own time is if your popes, if your bishops, if your hierarchs are basically stating that the Eastern Orthodox Church is unchanging. In fact, some of them kind of use it as an insult, that it's encapsulated in marble and stone and unchanging stasis. Why wouldn't you opt to be Eastern Orthodox over a evolving Church of Rome? Nonetheless, I do want to be a little fair to Jason because I do consider him a personal friend and he taught me a lot. Now, as he said, I didn't know anything about the Council of Chalcedon before this, so I apologize if at times I got mixed up and used the improper words or names or whatever it may be. And I appreciate you guys all for letting me be on here. And the main thing I really want to leave behind is if we hold to what the popes teach, especially the modern popes, I think they would all agree that for the most part, that the Council of Chalcedon did not demonstrate Vatican I ecclesiology. However, and I'm a steel man their position, that's okay because development of doctrine is okay. I think that is the actual Roman Catholic view. If anyone wants to dispute that and send me some documentation to read, I am okay with that, as long as you're okay with reading the documentation that I will send you in that respect. So the point is, stop LARPing. Just stop LARPing. There's no need to do it. We can find the true church. We can come together under one communion, one holy Catholic and apostolic faith, and we can all participate in the body, the blood, the divinity of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, in the Eucharist. And this is what I'm trying to invite you guys all to do. Also, a few of you Protestants in the chat, like, come on, guys. Like, it's either Orthodox, Catholic, or Oriental. And that's all I got to say. Nonetheless, Reason Belief, this is our first time speaking. I appreciate you, man. Jason, we've had countless conversations. I appreciate you. Shout out to Alex Soren, who briefly prepped me for this. And shout out to my boy Damaskinos, also known as Schoolboy Q, who was very supportive throughout this whole thing on a personal level. Also to my priest, Father Peter, who is absolutely amazing and leads me towards Christ every time I am with him, and my spiritual father, Georgios, who is a beloved brother of mine. That's all I got to say. Thank you, guys.
Amazing. Great stuff. Well, there we go. We have now completed the set debate that has now been completed. So now we get to go on to Q&A, which is...
I'm just going to run to the bathroom, Reasoned. Give me 1 second, brother.
You can absolutely fine. No worries. That's absolutely fine. So I'm going to go through, got a super chat here from Mundu says, Jason Lover sent you $20 to renew your Israeli passport. I have no idea what that's regarding. I'm hoping that's humorous. I apologize if it's not.
No, it's because I mentioned Hashem. That's why.
Oh, right. Okay. Gotcha. Well, there we go. And Orthodox Philip as well. Next debate, Jason versus Dr. Richard Price. Maybe. Who knows? Watch this space. We've got Orthodox Marcos has asked the question of social media accounts. It might be worth another plug, Jason. I'll have to wait for
to
come back.
Yeah, so where you can find me is on TikTok. My TikTok is Byzantine Papist. So yeah, Byzantine Papist. And you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter is JZZPERE. So I'm not even gonna pronounce that, but that's my Twitter. And you can find me on YouTube. And my YouTube is Papist from Byzantium. That's my YouTube. So that's where you're going to find me.
Yeah, might be worth popping it in the chat as well, so people can find your YouTube channel. That might be helpful as well. I know you've sent a message before in the chat. It might be worth popping that something in there. Oh, there we go. Sirius has put it in there.
Yeah, so you could find me True Patristic Path on Instagram, TikTok, and I'm on X. I don't use it though, to be honest with you, besides looking at all the Orthodox drama. And so yeah, just mainly TikTok right now.
There's certainly a lot of that going around at the minute.
Oh man, yeah. Don't even start.
Right, okay. So right, let's go through the questions in order. So question for you, True. What do you think about the Pope necessarily having to sign off on the earlier councils for them to be considered ecumenical? This was sent in right at the start, by the way, but because it was a question sent in, I do want to honor it.
It's a good question. I think that, again, this would just demonstrate Orthodox conciliarity if we take this in the proper context of the Pope also being one of the patriarchs, meaning that all the patriarchs have to sign off on the councils. Otherwise, the Pope maybe signed him afterwards, but from my knowledge, the Pope wasn't at a single council. He didn't go to not one of them. So maybe afterwards, but I'm not exactly sure, to be honest with you, as I'm new to this topic in general. But I would say, again, this would just demonstrate Orthodox conciliarity. That all of the patriarchs, including the Pope, have to sign off.
Okay, great stuff. So this question has come in. It hasn't directed it to anyone specifically. So if you guys are okay with it, do you guys both want to give an interpretation on the answer to the question?
Yeah, that's fine. As long as Jason's okay with that. Just show the question and then we'll know for sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So the question is, how does Paths interpret? Oh no, sorry. Yes, it is to you, Paths. Sorry,
it is to me.
I
Okay.
didn't read
No
it.
worries, no worries.
Never mind. How does Paths interpret the Synod of Constantinople, 1722, when it says it becomes clear that the Blessed Peter did not have any power and lordship over the holy apostles when he agreed to a distinction of power between the apostles?
That's a great question, Elijah. Do you mind going back to the prior
Yeah.
question? So I think importantly, the key, the nuance in all theological debates tends to get lost. He did not have any power and lordship over the holy apostles. I'm curious to see the entirety of the quote in context. Otherwise, I would say that maybe this one synod made a mistake. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I haven't read any of the synods of Constantinople, aside from the home synod, which is related to Chalcedon, as you know, Elijah. So, I mean, I don't know how to give you a good answer with that. I apologize. I would like to see the whole context to be able to answer it better, because I'm sure that is ripped from its proper place. Nonetheless,
I can get the context. I can get the context if you want.
If you want to briefly, that'd be cool.
Yeah, 1 second. Let me just. Is that all right with your reason, belief?
Absolutely fine. Yeah. I think it's also important to encourage that kind of behavior, because we don't want to descend to sort of Muslim level apologetics of cherry picking quotes. It's important to understand the context of things. So yeah, that's absolutely fine with me, Jason. No worries.
Yeah, I'd be interested to talk to this Elijah guy. It seems like he's knowledgeable. I was reading some of his comments throughout the debate. So Elijah, if you want to teach me some stuff, man, I'm in that Papist Discord with what's his face, Talon.
Rabbi Talon.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer another question while he looks for the context?
Yeah, we can do. Here we go. Jonathan asked a question. Since the episcopal instantination of Maximus of Antioch at Ephesus II was uncanonical, why was he received as a valid bishop prior to and at Chalcedon if Ephesus was uncanonical?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know. I don't know anything about this particular instance of Maximus of Antioch.
I think he's basically asking that Maximus of Antioch was actually uncanonically elected at Ephesus too, and logically he was going to be deposed at the council of Chalcedon because he was uncanonically elected. But the only reason he wasn't deposed was because Leo judged that he should rename bishop. So I think he's asking for your thoughts on that.
Again, like I just don't know. Like I'm very, as Jason said, new to the entirety of church history aside from the particulars of the Council of Chalcedon. So I'm not familiar with this exact thing. I apologize, gentlemen. I'm sure you're going to be disappointed many times.
No, that's absolutely fine. No, I think
I got the context, by the way, if you want it.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that's it's very commendable for both sides. If you don't, if you don't know something, there's no shame in saying you don't know the answer to the question. I think that that doesn't mean that you've lost an argument or lost a point. It's just you're just admitting that you don't know enough to answer the question fully. So that's always good. Yeah. Right. Okay. Here we go.
Wait, is it possible to zoom in? Or
you'd have to zoom in on your side.
Okay,
if you can.
Let me just
Control
do this.
plus.
Let me just share screen. Let me just share the screen. Okay, I'm sharing the screen.
Hang on, let me. I'll pop it full screen. Hang on. Let me take it. Oh no, that's no good.
Can you just read it, Jason?
Wait, can you see it
Oh,
now?
there we go. Yeah, that's
There we
better.
go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so this is the context.
But also from the Acts of the Apostles, which the Holy Luke wrote, it becomes clear that the Blessed Peter did not have any power and lordship over the Holy Apostles, but only to be first in order and in the first seat. For he says, Peter, rising up in the midst of the disciples, said, and there was a multitude of names together, about 120 men and brethren. It was necessary that this scripture should be fulfilled. So yeah, I think in context, this is literally just restating what I said in my debate with Jason just now, which is that the book of Acts demonstrates a sense that Peter is the first amongst equals. However, he doesn't have power over everyone else in the sense of unilateral power. Now, does he have influence over other people in the manner that I meant power? Yeah, obviously, he's Saint Peter. Same thing that Paul had. Saint Paul had a similar sway, let's say.
I see. But what I would say to that is that I think Saint Leo so when the councils Constantinople 1722, it says that Peter did not have any power and lordship over the other apostles. So that means that he didn't, like, there was no distinction of power between his and the other apostles. They were all equal, but only to be first in order and in the first seat. So only a plenary of honor that he had. But since Saint Leo was teaching that there was a distinction in power, there was a distinction in power between the apostles, then that means that the Council of Constantinople is contradicting Saint Leo and thus disagrees with him. So that's
stuff,
what I
right?
would have to say.
Great stuff. So Jason, got a question for you. This comes from Orthodox Marcos. Question for Jason: how would you reconcile what happened in Constantinople II with the papacy?
Imperial pressure. Imperial pressure doesn't invalidate one's ecclesiology. It just means that the emperor is a schizo and just abuses his power against the Pope, who is the supreme pastor of the church. So I wouldn't say that someone in secular status has any authority in the church, and if he tries to act within the church, then he's just committing illegal acts, because according to the fathers, the matters of ecclesiology within the church are for the bishops alone, but the matters of secular authority are for the emperor. So if the emperor is intervening in church affairs, then he's just abusing his imperial power, which he has no right to do. So I would just say that there's nothing that needs to be reconciled within that situation, because it actually contradicts both of our ecclesiologies, what happened to it.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that. Got a question here again for you, Jason, as well. What does Price say that Emperor Marcian felt like he needed to recall a council to annul Ephesus II if Leo thought he did?
Well, first of all, I'm not aware that Emperor Marcian thought that he needed to call a council to annul Ephesus II. But even if he did, we already see that during session 1 of the Council of Chalcedon, Theodora and Eusebius of Dorian were reinstated by Pope St. Leo the Great, which means that the Council of Ephesus II was effectively annulled by the authority of the successor of St. Peter, which means that whether Marcian thought that the council was needed to do that, it doesn't matter, because at the start of the council, they recognized the council as utterly null and void.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that answer there, Jason. Got a question for Patristic. Why does your Saint Gelasius first use the judgment of St. Leo over Ephesus II as an example of the Pope judging the entire church without being able to being judged?
again, like I don't know the context of this random particular event in history. Like, I apologize. I've never heard of Saint Galatius using this argument. So like, I'm just not gonna have good answers to like quote mines. I know you're not doing quote mining in a disingenuous manner, but like I'm not gonna have answers to quote mines because I try to study topics holistically, and right now I was studying Chalcedon. So I guess this is related to it, but in a sense that I never approached the topic directly. So like Jason, can you give me the context without pulling up a quote, just like a quick context that I could quickly respond to? Jason's not here. And just to briefly, oh, there you go.
Wait, you can say what was you can say what you was about to say.
I was just going to say, just to briefly reiterate, or excuse me, to clarify what I meant by quote mine before people start spazzing. What I mean by that is anytime you utilize a quote as an argument to prove something, quote mining doesn't necessarily always entail something negative. You can use it negatively, and that's why I said specifically, I know you're not trying to use it in a negative fashion. Anyways, Jason, can you give me some context that I could address maybe? I could just say Saint Galatius was... I mean, I really don't know the context because it might be appropriate in certain contexts to say that St. Leo's judgment over Ephesus 2 was infallible, but that would be because it agrees with Orthodox conciliarity and the entire church.
Yeah, so what St. Anthony, one second. I can get you the quote right now, actually. So what St. Galatius says is, he says this. Let me just share my screen again.
Okay, preparing to pop that on screen. There we go.
And so Galatius says that Galatius says, because she did not consent, absolves, and likewise Flavian, as holy Nenere, condemned by a congregation of bishops, she absolved by the same tenor, because the apostolic see alone did not consent, and rather the one who had been received there condemned Dioscorus, bishop of the second see, by her own authority, and by not consenting displaced the entire synod, and so the truth decreed alone that the synod of Chalcedon should be held. So Saint Galatius is saying that the only reason Ephesus 2 was not valid was because the apostolic see, i.e. Rome alone, did not consent to the Second Ephesian Synod.
Right. Well, that's a good point. Now, the issue with that again is the general scholarly consensus is that Ephesus 2 was rejected on grounds of lawlessness, not on grounds of specifically the Pope of Rome having unilateral jurisdiction over the church to annul councils. So again, this is just anachronistic and is just not what you're going to find if you read scholars on the topic.
And then, would you take the successor of Leo as valid, or
meaning the next pope?
Well, a pope that came like 30 years later or 40 years later.
I'm not sure what you mean by valid. What do you mean by that?
No, would you take his accounts of events as reliable or unreliable?
Again, like Richard Price said about St. Leo the Great, that many times he acted, and actually he says this about Rome in general, that they wanted to act as if they had unilateral power. However, the East didn't recognize it. This is what he says in his book, and I think he also said it on an interview. So, like, whether it's Pope Leo, Pope Pius IX, or any pope in between, it doesn't matter. The history is the history, and it demonstrates that ultimately a conciliar review court model is over and above a papal jurisdiction.
I mean, yeah, I guess
that's the best answer I could give, Jason.
Yeah, that's good.
Great stuff. And then we've got this is I'm going to take this as the last question I'm going to be taking from the audience, because I've got a couple more left. I want to be respectful of these guys' time. So last question to Patristic. If Canon 28 is against the papacy, why did Pius the 12th, a post-Vatican I Pope, accept it as non-contrary to the papacy? Did Pius the 12th not believe in Vatican I?
I think that, again, it's actually a great question because it relates to what I was just saying, is that a pope or any bishop for that matter, anyone for that matter, can say something, and it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the case. So if he says that it is not contrary to the papacy, or if he says that it is not contrary to Vatican I, even specifically, for an example, it doesn't matter. The consensus and the evidence demonstrates that Canon 28 literally is against the papacy. And no offense to Pius, I can't count. What is that? 12th? Pius the 12th.
12.
Thank you. No offense to him, but Saint Leo the Great tried to annul the canon, and the canon passed. So I don't care what this Pope said when Saint Leo the Great was ultimately, let's say, on the wrong end of this issue when it was ultimately passed. And as I said multiple times throughout the debate, actually occurred with Constantinople rising to the status that Canon 28 said it would cause it to rise to, as Richard Price says.
Great stuff. This is an interesting. This is coming through as a super chat. Interesting to get your take on this, Jason. Lance says Vatican I is flowery language. Would you agree with, because that statement tends to get thrown around a lot with Vatican I? Like, would you say that there's flowery language in Vatican I, or would you say that it's quite to the point?
I mean, with everything, with every statement of the popes in the first millennium, who were clearly very papalistic in language, being deduced to near flowery language, then I would say that Lance, I would say that Lance could possibly interpret the First Vatican Council in a flowery language way, because if we see the claims of Vatican I being present in the books and they're taken as flowery language, then I don't see why an EO can't read Vatican I in the flowery language sense. But for the record, Lance is a Catholic, so that question is just a joke. But yeah, I would say that it's GG's, man, honestly.
Cool, that's fine. I just wanted to get your take on it because obviously, you being a Roman Catholic, you might come across, Eastern Orthodox, floating that claim around quite a bit of saying, there's a lot of flowery language in Vatican I. So it's just interesting to hear your perspective on it. That's sort of why I put it up there.
Yeah, so good.
And this one, Jason, do you have Discord so I can get in contact? Are you happy to give out your Discord on this live stream, or do you want them to get in contact with you through TikTok or something?
Yeah, I don't mind, actually. My Discord is Byzantine Papist. That's my Discord.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. And this is an interesting one because I actually have a recommendation for this one. What are the best books to look at for this topic? The question is for both Jason and Patristic. So I'll kick it off because I've started reading Eric Ybarra's book, The Papacy, and there's a really interesting quote right at the very start that I just want to read out because I think it's really interesting. As the reader can guess, this entire book is a publication seeking to revisit the debate on the subject of the papacy between Catholics and Orthodox. Admittedly, when I commenced my studies, I had thought the case for Catholicism was far more compelling than any case for Orthodoxy could afford. As of now, I am thoroughly convinced that this debate is not concluded with a first-round knockout for either side. I now sense that if Catholicism does win this debate, it only wins by going the full distance of 12 rounds and by a remarkably close call. This is because the Byzantine claims can be well supported by good historical evidence. If one studies only one side, perhaps only consulting Catholic apologists on the papacy, it can appear that Orthodoxy does not stand a chance in the debate. When one gives extra time to study the matter from both sides, one will learn that humble patience and plenty of rethinking is required. So I think I like Eric Ybarra's approach to the whole topic of the papacy. He's very sort of like, look, guys, there's a lot of evidence for both sides. So, and he's presenting both sides of the coin. He sort of leaves it to you to make a decision, which I think is very commendable, especially considering he's a Roman Catholic himself. Do either of you two have recommendations of sources or books or things like that to read on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Go
you
ahead,
can go.
Jason.
You can go.
No, you go
Like,
first, homie. You go first.
Okay, so for this specific topic about Chalcedon, I would just recommend The Roman Clemency by Dr. Luke Rivington. I think that's probably the best book that covers the papacy during the era of Chalcedon. Well, if you want a good book in general about the papacy as a whole, well, I would recommend Eric Rowell's book, All the Three. I would recommend what else would I recommend? I mean, to be honest, I think those are the only modern works that I would recommend. The rest are just translated books, which we wouldn't be able to find online necessarily. So you would have to, you would have to go and translate the works yourselves, like the scholastic, the scholastic works on the papacy, like John of Saint Thomas. He goes over the whole ecclesiastical structure of um of the Roman Catholic ecclesiological system, and you can read on the Roman Pontiff, I think Robert Leonine as well. He defends the structure of the papacy, and he shows why the papacy is actually necessary. It's actually translated into English, but a book that goes over the entire history of the papacy it is actually in Latin, so you're going to need to translate it into English, and it's by Cardinal Baronius. Cardinal Baronius, he did a whole translation, or he did a whole series of translating church history from the 1st century onto the 17th century, onto the 14th century, if I'm not mistaken. So I would recommend them. But yeah, those would be the books that I recommend for the papacy.
Yeah, for anyone who wants to steelman the Eastern Orthodox view, I'd say first and foremost, I would start with the actual source text, the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon. Interestingly, Price, as you guys notice, I love this guy. In the introduction, I think refutes Catholicism. So it's good. I think it's good for an Orthodox to listen to what he has to say. But even further than that, just to get general knowledge, he does give a lot, and I mean too much to remember, on Ephesus 2, the Home Synod, the controversies with Eutychides and Flavian and Dioscorus and St. Leo the Great, and these letters back and forth, and Marcion the Emperor. And there's a lot of information. Highly recommend the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon. Also, I'd recommend Two Paths by Michael Welton. It's a very short book, but it just introduces you to the ideas of basically papacy versus orthodoxy in the first millennia and a little bit into the second millennia. And then lastly, this is going to sound a little corny, but I would highly, highly, highly recommend Ubi Petrus on this topic in particular. I think his debate with Eric Ibarra was not only one of the best Orthodox debates because they were both very polite, very cordial the whole time, but it was also very thorough. Ubi has a website. I think it's like Ubi Petrus Ibi Ecclesia or something like that, which Eric Ibarra has something equivalent where he thoroughly goes into the details on Chalcedon and other councils, specifically in terms of the Catholic papal claims. But yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say. Other than that, that's it, man.
Great stuff. Well, I want to thank you two guys for being absolute gentlemen in the debate. Even though, you know, cross-exam does get fiery, it's all in good love. So thank you very much for, you know, taking part, for doing the research, you know, for studying up, for doing the PowerPoints, even though, you know, true, you could have put some images in. Come on. I mean,
I know, dude. I should have made them more pretty.
It's all good. But yeah, do either of you guys have anything final to say?
I love you, Jason. I mean that genuinely. I hope you become Orthodox again. I think it's a great shame that you left. However, I do think you're genuinely seeking this out with a good heart. Elijah in the chat, please DM me because I actually want to hear what you have to say. Other than that, guys, thank you so much. Reason Belief, thank you so much. Everyone, check out Reason Belief's book. He actually just wrote a book. You can find it on Amazon. It's like a beautiful red cover with a prayer rope on it. There you go. Other than that, like for the bottom of my heart, I really do appreciate you, Jason, even though I thoroughly disagree with you. That's it, man. That's all I got to say. Thank you guys so much for allowing me this opportunity.
Well, I mean, you know, I got to thank you for the segue into plugging my own book. But I wrote a book called "Have Mercy on Me, Sinner: The Hard Truths About Historical Christianity and Why It Matters." It's written towards Protestants. So if you have a Protestant friend who's, you know, a little bit sort of just like, oh, I'm not sure, get them that book. It's very neutral. I do write from an Orthodox perspective. However, I do highlight in certain places the Catholic view on certain things, to be fair on both sides. And I, you know, I try and build up an argument from a sola scriptura point of view, with, you know, laying the framework with just scripture and then building on it with the patristics. So it's gotten some very good reviews. And the foreword is written by Father Mikhail Balaka from the YouTube channel Living Orthodox. Shout out Father Mikhail if you're watching. Jason, anything further to add at all before we close?
Yeah, I just want to thank you again for this wonderful debate. I wish the I don't know what to say. I just want to thank both of you for this wonderful debate. I want to thank Nathaniel for the discussion. I want to thank Region Relief for hosting it. I'm being generous, and I hope people who hear this become convinced of Roman Catholicism, because I do believe it is the true church. I do believe that the papal claims are undeniable in early church history. And yeah, I just want to thank you guys again. I love you guys, truly.
Love you too, Jason. God bless you, brother. Well, thank you for tuning in for the debate, guys. If you haven't already, do hit that subscribe button. It is free. Ring the bell so you don't miss any new videos from myself or any new live streams. It'd be great to see you back again. I invite all kinds of people on this channel, Catholics, Orthodox, you know, even some Protestants, what have you. And the aim is to have healthy dialogue, deep discussions, and to give you a reason to believe. Hence the name Reason Belief. But thank you so much for watching, guys. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video. Adios.